what you believe when you come to the Bible will affect your interpretation thereof. Do you understand? So, this is true of whatever ideology. And I can give you example after example after example. That's why when you come to the Bible, you listen to God. You don't impose your beliefs. And this is something new that I have been seeing. This critical race theory, this ideology behind the Black Lives Matter movement, I've been witnessing other pastors who at one time seemed to be decent teachers. They're letting this ideology seep into their reading of the Bible. And I just thought of it right now. I made some screenshots on my phone that I could read them to you, but I'll just leave it alone. One of the things that I've heard is that, again, when we come to Exodus, we come to a story about God fulfilling his promise to a man by the name of Abraham. And why did God promise Abraham this promise? Because Abraham is a means to an end. In other words, it's through Abraham and through his seed, singular. The book of Genesis tells us that God's purpose in choosing Abraham was not because Abraham had any merit in himself, but it was in accordance with God's own purpose. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes, right, shall not perish but have everlasting life. That was the ultimate aim. It's for God to bring his son into the world as he sends him forth, and he incarnated. The biggest problem that man has is that men are alienated from the life of God. And our sinful hearts, our unregenerate state, is the root cause of all evil in the world. But in the Black Lives Matter movement and their ideology, they say, no, that's not it. That's not it. The main problem in the world is power structure and authority figures. And they read the story of Moses and reinterpret it to say, you see, you had the oppressors, which is Egypt, and you have the oppressed. And therein is the problem in the world, that when people arrive at a position of authority, and so what needs to happen is you need to free the oppressed people and change the entire power structure. Some of you find it inconceivable that there are people who are actually advocating the defunding of the police and to get rid of it altogether. Do you know where that comes from? Do you know where that comes from? It comes from Marxist ideology, wherein they say all the problems in the world come from authority figures. Police officers are authority figures, so if you simply remove them and get them out of the way, and you destroy authority, and you create this socialism, then everything will be great. That's where that's coming from. So you wonder, how did we get to a place where we're talking about getting rid of police officers? Marxist ideology rampant in the Black Lives Matter movement. This is not about race anymore. This is about something different altogether. And I really hope that we can grow in our discernment to see this. But let's get back to Exodus. Now, the reason I say this is because we find in Exodus something that is very applicable. And I want to inform you of these things, because let me just grab my phone quick. Oh, I put it in my notes. That's where it is. Here's a quote. Now, this is not the only quote that I read. And I can give you the source, but I saw this. And even people who are not Christians are recognizing that the social justice movement, it's no longer about race, it's about a religion. And he said, social justice ideology is a religion for people who make gods out of their skin colors or self-interest. Social justice ideology is a religion with its own orthodoxies and heresies, its own priests and prophets, its own sacred slogans and confessions or catechisms, and particularly its own version of sin and righteousness. Are you guys understanding what I'm saying? You know, there are naive, uninformed Christians. When they hear the term Black Lives Matter, they rightly recognize, of course, Black Lives Matter, just like white lives matter, just like brown lives matter, because these Christians who are uninformed about the ideology, they say, of course they matter because the Bible teaches that all men are created equal in the sight of God, right? So they're not wrong about that, but because they don't do the research and they're undiscerning, they swallow the whole thing and they attach themselves to movements that are absolutely racist and ungodly and anti-Christian. And it really saddens me that this is happening. You know, years ago, I used to, I still do from time to time, but I was so against the prosperity gospel because in the Word of Faith movement, all of the major doctrines are redefined or changed. For example, God, according to Kenneth Copeland, God is a God who lives on another planet. This is all documented, and you can find it in a lot of books like Christianity in Crisis by Hank Hanegraaff, and there's other books where he was quoted. Kenneth Copeland would teach that God was a God who lived on another planet, and God wanted to duplicate himself. That's exactly the words he used. God wanted to duplicate, make a copy of himself, and start another planet where another God would reign over it. And so God created Earth, which is a copy of the mother planet. Those are the exact words he used. They're a copy of the mother planet. And God created Earth, and then he put a God on that planet, which we know as Adam. That sounds ridiculous, but I'm telling you, I'm very well versed in this because I studied this for years, and I warned people over and over when I was living in San Antonio, and even when I came down, and nobody cared. And Chris, you're just causing division and speaking against the Lord's anointed, and blah, blah, blah. And that's why I pastor a small church like this, because nobody wants to hear this stuff. And so Kenneth Copeland would teach that Adam was a God over the earth, and then listen, and then Jesse Duplantis would say that God just simply formed the material that made the animals, but all the animals were brought lifeless to Adam because the animals were not living. And God literally carried the animals to Adam, and Adam breathed into the animals the breath of life. I know, Brother Lynn, it sounds outrageous, but they teach this stuff all the time. But we have Christians who hear people like these prosperity preachers, and they say, oh, he must be a good teacher because he's using the words Jesus, and he's using God, and he's using the Bible. And we just superficially hear these things, and we think all is well. But they don't go any deeper to find out what's behind these things. And so that's why. So salvation is changed. Salvation is no longer being reconciled unto God. Salvation is about reobtaining your own deity. And the reason that things don't go well in your life is because you were originally made as a little God. And when Satan took over the world, we lost our deity. And so therefore, salvation and regeneration is about reattaining your deity. And now that you are a little God, now things can go well for you by the word of faith. So if you're poor, just confess money into your life. If you're sick, confess healing into your life. And so things are brought into the world through confession coupled with faith. So faith is redefined, salvation is redefined, sin is redefined. So you have preachers like Joel Osteen. What's wrong with Joel Osteen? He defines sin in a way that the Bible does not. In the world of Joel Osteen, sin is no longer personal transgression against a holy God. Sin is a hindrance. You say, well, of course sin is a hindrance. But see, sin is something that gets in the way from you achieving and being all you can be. Do you see? Everything is redefined. And so the response I would get from other Christians when I would speak about these things is like, brother, I just think that they emphasize money too much. If you're telling me that the problem that you see with these prosperity preachers is an emphasis on money, you don't understand. You don't understand that all of the basic teachings of the Bible have been redefined. You think it's simply an issue of money. That tells me you're ignorant. And I don't mean that as an insult. That tells me you don't study well, you're not discerning. And that's the problem. The same, you know that there can be people in church who identify as Christian on a superficial level, but once you start digging deeper, you find that they don't really believe what the Bible actually teaches, but they identify with the church, and they hold on to things superficially. This is true of every religion. Catholics, Baptists, And I believe it's the same with those who attach themselves to the Black Lives Matter movement, who identify as Christians. They don't know what they've gotten themselves into. They don't know what they've gotten themselves into.